From some awkward encounters on our first trip to the UK, to learning about some cultural norms that we never knew about. Today we're going to be discussing 10 shocking differences between the US and the UK, starting with one that I learned just recently, and that is there are some wild differences in our elections and our political campaigns. The main two things. First, I learned that UK elections are only about 6 weeks long.
That would be lovely.
Wouldn't that be nice? We in the US, at least a presidential campaign, can last, 2 years. That process starts. And the idea of having a 6-week political campaign compared to a 2-year run just sounds so much less stressful.
Yeah, I feel like the actual things where they debate and stuff like that are really more like the last
few months,
yeah. 6 months. But they're out there doing other kinds of campaigning and putting ads up. Yeah, at least a year.
Fundraising.
Probably.
Talking about fundraising, that's actually a really interesting difference that I didn't know that the US was so unique in that we have so much financial backing in our political campaigns. There's so much money in politics. In the US, we have something called a PAC, which stands for Political Action Committee, I think. There's also a Super PAC. They are basically a tax-exempt organization that is basically a way for corporations and businesses to funnel money into politics. There's basically a lot of money that gets poured into political campaigns. The example that I can think of that comes to mind is in Washington State, probably 10 years ago now, there was a bill that was voted on saying that any food in the supermarket needed to say if it had GMOs in it. PACs were able to basically kill that bill. Like, it did not pass. I remember there was all kinds of advertising at the time of how it was going to be bad for farmers, how it was going to raise the cost of food. And I'm not an economist, I don't know that. But there is kind of this idea that it would be nice, like, don't we have the right to know what is in our food?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's an example. Like, I know there are a lot of big food corporations that were behind that PAC, and that's a case of corporate money being able to kill a bill. Yay, America! And talking about food and groceries, I think we've kind of talked about the differences between the food supply in the US and the UK before on our channel, but I think, not only do we put a lot of ingredients in foods here in the US that are
you
banned,
guys don't allow.
that are banned in other places. And primarily today we're comparing the US and the UK because our audience is highly UK based.
Yeah, primarily.
We've spent a lot of time there, but this is true of many other countries.
Yeah,
I feel like the US is kind of the outlier in a lot of these situations. But specifically with food, I think we also noticed some differences in our weekly shops and just kind of the difference culturally of how we go to supermarkets and how we do our weekly shopping in the UK versus the US. The one thing I remember noticing last year when we were there for an extended time was how there are labels of very clear, like, it's red, it's green, it's color coded to tell you if something is good for you or not. It makes it real easy. Like, we're gonna do the work for you. This is probably not so good for you. I think that kind of information gets buried in the US. I think even aside from the actual differences in kind of how our countries operate our food supply, I think there's like a very cultural difference between how we shop, because in the US, I feel like it's so much more common to do like a big weekly shop or like shop and buy, stock up. Like, I think about my parents' house, and like my parents have a huge selection of like stockpiled of all kinds of canned foods, like boxed food. They have like an extra freezer in their garage that has all kinds of extra food in it. And I think that kind of presence is more common in the US, probably a combination of having more space to store more food, but also just, we put a lot more preservatives and things in our food.
Well, I think it also goes back to like a lot of the places people don't drive there.
Yeah.
So you would have to take the train or the bus or walk, and you don't necessarily want to bring as many things home, especially if you're by yourself.
Yeah. That's a great point, because I think when we were there for a longer term in the UK, we very much only would do a grocery shop like every couple days. And we would just buy food for like today and tomorrow, maybe 3 or 4 days, but definitely not more than that.
No, there's a couple of times we went to like a bigger supermarket and bought like a week's worth of stuff, but that was really only a few times.
Yeah, but there's also a lot smaller stores. There's not these there's not as many big box stores, and I know that there are Costco's in the UK, but not as many. And I feel like Costco is a very like American culture thing of like, look at all the things I got at Costco.
Look at this giant jar of sauce. I don't know.
Yeah, like we have a lot more things in bulk. Like I even think about toiletries and stuff. Like when we buy toilet paper, we buy like a 50 pack of toilet paper just because we can. It's like we buy stuff in bulk because it saves us a discount, where I think, and maybe this speaks to us just being in like an Airbnb and walking to a supermarket, but we would only buy like maybe a pack of it when we were there. Like a small pack of 4, like 6 or 8 or something, but not a lot more than that.
Most times with that too, we were there a lot of the time long enough to justify buying one that was more than 4, except for a few places.
But I also don't remember seeing like huge amounts of like, here, buy this giant tub of mayonnaise.
No.
Or anything like that. Or salad cream if you prefer.
It's a lot of factors, I'm sure. I mean, you guys could probably tell us more. But yeah, I think it's space, having a vehicle, and a lot of the stuff is like doesn't have preservatives if it's actual food. Or, I mean, it has some, but not to the extent that ours has.
Yeah. You should let us know, when you do your shopping, how often do you shop, and do you drive to the supermarket, or do you walk, or how do you get there? I think in the US, it is so much more common to drive, stock up, and then, you know, have your set groceries for at least a week, you know? Let's switch gears for a little bit, because this one, and by the way, these are not in any particular order. Number 8 is a TV license. We learned last year, we didn't even know this until I think the end of our time in the UK last year, that you have to pay, I think the price just went up to £169.50 as of April 2024. A license. This is a TV license so that you get access to, I guess, the BBC and your public broadcasting channels, which we do not have anything like that in the US.
No, it's not the same. I mean, we don't have to pay for it, but it's, I feel like, more limited if you don't pay for like a paid TV service like cable or streaming. And we have, I think, more commercials than you have in the UK.
That's fair. We definitely have more commercials, or adverts, as we like to call them. The reason that I learned this difference is because I saw somebody, like, it was suggested on YouTube one day, somebody was refusing to pay it because they don't watch those channels, and they were saying that, I guess, even if you watch YouTube, you still have to pay for the license, and they were like, no, I'm not doing it. And I thought that was an interesting video. Strange thing for me to come across as an American. Our networks clearly operate differently. We have these huge budgets because of all the advertising and stuff and money that's in programming.
They're all for-profit organizations. They're not run by the government.
Yeah. I think we've known about some of the different aspects of the BBC versus some of the channels that we have in the US. I just had no idea that there was a license fee, and when I found out about it, I thought, that's kind of weird, but you're probably used to it. I just remember the first time that we went to the UK, and sometimes still when it happens, we will go to the UK and we'll go to, you know, a lovely town, and then we'll call it a city or vice versa, and we'll always get a flood of comments saying like, that's a city, not a town, or that's a village, not a town, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And I think we've had some people explain to us that the classification of cities is different than the US, because in the US, and I think a lot of other places, it's basically by population size. Yeah. So like any big metropolitan area is a city, and anything else is a town. And, you know, maybe some unique areas of like New England, they'll have boroughs.
Or villages, but it's not very common.
And so for us to come over to the UK and there's all these classifications and it's like, well, this place, there's a cathedral here, so this is a city, and this place doesn't have a cathedral, but it's a city. And we ended up finding out, because we've had a lot of people tell us that basically any place that has a cathedral is a city, which I guess that's how they used to do things a long time ago. But there's a really good Map Men video about kind of all the intricacies of it. And I guess cities are now determined by the monarch. And so that's why there's like different classifications of like whether they have a university or a cathedral, or if they don't, they're just like, you know, big industrial places. Like I guess Birmingham was the first city that was a non-cathedral city. I mean, it was really, really hard for us to get used to. And I still, every time that we go anywhere in the UK, I will do my best to Google, is this a town or a city, so that I don't get it wrong when I say it, because I know that people will come after us in the comments about it.
We still do sometimes.
I know, we still get it wrong.
Our friends will tell us first, and then we'll hear it in the comments.
It's a city.
Is it a city? Oh, dang. Now this is something that we've discussed before, because it was a shocking difference not going to the UK but coming back. It was kind of the reverse culture shock of being in the UK for, you know, 6 months, and then other parts of Europe for another 2.5 months, and coming back to the US and going, wow, we drive everywhere. And there are drive-thrus everywhere. And it made me reflect and think about how we just walked so many more places when we were in the UK. We have been to maybe a McDonald's drive-thru, maybe more than that. Not very many in the UK.
Only a handful.
When we go a couple towns over, we go and get coffee. We usually wait in the drive-thru. And every time that we're in that drive-thru, it always has a long line. You could probably walk up to the window outside and get your coffee faster. But we just have such a drive-thru culture that we're like, we're all just gonna sit here in our cars, breathing in each other's exhaust. This is good. This is the good life. The next one on our list is something that we don't really talk about too much.
Well, we don't have a lot of experience.
We don't have a lot of experience with at least the NHS, but we have a lot of viewers bring it up, because I think to a lot of people in the UK, the American healthcare system is scary, and it probably should be, because we'll kind of get into a little bit of our experience with it. For any Americans or viewers outside of the UK, the NHS is essentially the universal healthcare system of the UK. I'm sure that it's paid for with taxes. I mean, you're paying for it, but everything is covered. We've had people tell us that they go in, do whatever, and they just leave and the bill is zero, and that's pretty wild as an American. To be totally honest, I've spent probably more than half of my adult life without health insurance than I've had it. I mean, and it wasn't even until the Affordable Care Act that Obama passed that even really kind of gave anybody some options. The best health insurance that I have ever had was when I worked at a pediatric clinic, when I worked in healthcare, and I still paid $200 a month on top of what the company I worked for was paying. Just to give you some perspective of healthcare costs. We have been told that there are, you know, some downsides to the NHS, like that there can be, you know, long-term wait times to see a specialist or things like that, which the same can be true with insurance in the US. So I don't know, if you work for the NHS or you have more information about it and you would like to kind of fill us in, please reach out to us and let us know, because we would love to have a conversation with somebody who knows much more than we do. When we were living in Florida, I broke a dish when I was doing the dishes one night, and I sliced my finger open. We went to urgent care. They basically put a Band-Aid on it. Like, that's pretty much all they did. I severed the tendon. If you've seen our videos before and you've gone, why do you have a weird finger? Because we do get that comment sometimes. It's because I severed a tendon, and the urgent care clinic I went to put a Band-Aid on it and charged me $500 for it. Hopefully that paints the picture of like what our healthcare system is like versus maybe what yours is like in the UK. Healthcare seems like a complicated topic to tackle because it just seems like this big dark cloud looming over us here. And I'm sure that people in the UK, I'm sure that you've had experiences with the NHS that are probably less than ideal. I know some of you have. And it's maybe one of those things of like grass is always greener.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe not. But let's go into something that's a little bit more lighthearted, and that is some of the weird, awkward encounters that we had in our first trip to the UK, because there are some language differences. We love learning about the language differences. I constantly love learning new different words and phrases and things like that. But there were a few when we first went to the UK that really threw me off. I mean, one of them is the restroom thing, the bathroom thing. Seeing toilet signs everywhere is a little bit off-putting as an American, but many of you have told us that you like to call it the loo, and I like that, so I'll use that.
I mean, the toilet is what it is. That's where you're going.
Yeah.
There's not a bath in the bathroom.
Fair. Another instance that happened on our first trip that kind of threw me through a loop, and actually, we would talk to our friends Sean and Caroline pretty regularly, especially in the pandemic. We were like catching up a lot with them. And every time we talked to them, they'd say, "You all right?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, everything's fine. What's going on, you know?" And it wasn't until we got to the UK and we went to a supermarket and the person checking our groceries said, "You all right?" And I went, "Oh, that means like, hi, how are you?" That's a greeting. Where in the US, if someone said, "Are you all right?" I would think it meant like, is something wrong? Is everything okay? Yeah.
You've been hurt. Are you okay?
Yeah, are you okay? Is everything okay? It implies like something's wrong. Every time that we talked to them and they would say that to us, I was like, yeah, gosh, do I seem like I'm depressed all the time or something? But no, it's just a greeting.
I think I may have picked up on it before you.
I guess you did, because I didn't notice. I was like, yeah, I'm okay. Do I seem like I'm off today? But yeah, that was a fun cultural experience of me in a supermarket going, oh. Before we went to the UK, I remember learning one of the differences in words that we use is in the UK you call it a bum bag. And we have a different name for it, which I didn't learn until after we were in the UK. That doesn't mean what it means to us.
This is another thing I knew before you did.
You knew that too? I didn't know that's why they called it a bum bag. I didn't know. I guess now they're called a crossbody bag, but I like bum bag anyways. But I guess in the UK it's a front bottom. I don't know. Those are the things I can think of. Can you think of, I'm sure we had more weird interactions like that too, where I went, oh, that's what that word means. But those are the ones that come to mind. Right. Number 3. This is one that I didn't know was unique to the US until we went to the UK and kind of experienced talking to other people, having people tell us that we have a hustle culture. I didn't know that we have such a hustle culture in the US and that we have such a work-oriented culture. Apparently we do. And when I look at things like, I think I saw that the UK requires 28 days off a year minimum, I believe, which equates to like 5 weeks. In the US, we don't have standard paid amount of time off. Like, we do not have a set amount of vacation time. There are different rules and regulations depending on like the city and state that you're in. Like, for example, when I used to work in Portland had a mandatory 1 week of sick time paid off. If the business wants to, maybe 2 weeks paid time off is standard, but that's not even standard.
No, a lot of places you like accrue it as you're working. So you might end up after working there a year with 2 weeks because you get, say, 2 hours a week that you accrue every time you get paid. You know, realizing how different we are in that regard, it's kind of a bummer. Like, really? Wow. You know? It goes back to like the server thing and tips too, that is like the tipping culture. Yeah, because we don't have a federal, like, minimum wage.
I mean, we do.
We do, but it doesn't affect some people, like servers.
Depending on the state,
Yeah.
I have always felt the hustle culture. Like, I kind of like the hustle culture, I think. But then when I actually think about it, and it's like, gosh, 28 days of paid time off. Like, I haven't taken a full week off of vacation in years, like literal years. Like, even when we went on a cruise, I bought the highest internet package so that I could work on the cruise. Like, that is how much of a hustle culture that we have here. And I think about, people that we know who work 2 jobs. Like, my friend that's getting married picked up like an additional job so she could pay for her wedding, and like just things like that, where it's like, you shouldn't have to do that just to, survive.
I think being like sort of self-employed is like the same thing. You're not guaranteed any sort of vacation because you're kind of your own boss.
Gosh, we could take a lesson from other countries. So I actually only added this one to the list this morning. And that's because I saw a post on Facebook that said, yard signs. What's a yard sign that's an instant red flag? And one of the top comments on the post was, I'm British, what's a yard sign? And I went, what? Oh wait, yeah, now that I think about it, I don't remember seeing yard signs in the UK. I guess it's kind of a combination of like yard signs and flag culture. When we traveled throughout the UK, I remember seeing flags for Cornwall in Cornwall, Welsh flags in Wales, Scottish flags in Scotland, some English flags in England, but not a ton of Union Jack flags. And here in the US, we love our American flags, man. we put those things on everything.
Lots of people do.
But we do. I mean, you drive down the street and you see cars, vehicles with American flag stickers. You see, houses that have flags. And I guess to answer the question of what's a yard sign, I think mostly they're political.
Yeah, usually it's for someone running for office. It's just interesting because I think we learned from being in the UK and differently, but in a similar vein in Germany, like we didn't see signs like that in the UK. And in Germany, they were only in certain spots. They weren't like in someone's yard. They were in like central areas where I'm assuming there are places where you could place signs like that.
I remember being in the UK and just feeling like, it's so refreshing to not see political signs because, talking about the differences earlier of like a 2-year campaign versus a 6-week campaign, they're just there all the time. Even like 4 years that they're president, you still see,
There's
signs.
some people that leave them out still.
Mm-hmm. Well, a presidential yard sign is probably the most prevalent thing that we see.
That's fair. We just had the local elections here, so there was a lot of mayor and things like that signs that were up recently, and some of them still are up, like we were saying.
And some of them are like, vote no on this bill or things like that.
Yeah.
Like you can see all kinds of signs, but they're typically political in nature.
Yeah.
And that is weird. I don't remember seeing anything like that.
No.
Like maybe occasional Union Jack flag occasionally. And probably more like localized like flags to the area that we were in.
Yeah.
But nothing like here in the good old USA. I think here in the US, flying an American flag is seen as patriotic, and I think in other places in the world, I feel like, like Germany and stuff, that's seen as more of like an extreme thing to do. It's like a nationalist thing to do. So, I don't know. Who's right and who's wrong?
Don't know,
but we do love a good American flag here. Number 1, we've made it, at least on this list. And that is drinking culture. I think most Americans would know that there's a pub culture in the UK, and probably at least a drinking culture to some extent. But I don't think until we were there that it's like just very normalized, where I don't think that that's necessarily, like, it can be here, but it's just like an everyday part of life.
I don't see people here going to the pub or the bar every day, but I think they're a different creature. Like, you're going and having a meal and hanging out with friends, at a pub. You're not necessarily doing that at a bar. A bar might not even have food.
One of the differences that I noticed between the drinking culture here in the UK, and I think I even knew about it from our friends before we went, but in the US, we have a similar alcohol limit. Like, what do you call that? The blood alcohol limit?
Yeah,
blood alcohol count? We have, I think it's 0.08%
It depends on the state.
in many states. Sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's like 0.05, which I think it's 0.05 in Scotland if I remember what I was looking up. It's very similar in what the limit is, but as Americans, it's very standard to have like 1 or 2 drinks and then, drive. Like, you go drive somewhere. Maybe part of that's our driving culture. We can't just walk to a pub. But I think we learned from friends and people we knew, I think even before we went, that like it's really not, like you shouldn't really do it. It's frowned upon. Like you shouldn't even have a drink and then go drive. And so when we've been in the UK, I've never done that. Anytime that we've had a car, I've never drank at the same time that I'm driving. No, but like occasionally in the US, like I'll have a beer and then drive home.
Yeah.
Which I just would never do that in the UK, but I think it's because it's just culturally very different.
Well, and I think it seems like from what we've learned that the consequences are more dire in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's just expensive here in the US. Like, it's a lot.
Go to a class and maybe spend a lot of money on your ticket and don't get pulled over again doing it.
I was reading that in the UK, you can serve up to 6 months in prison and have your license taken away for a year if you are caught above the legal limit, which
most likely isn't going to happen in the US unless you do damage to someone's property or something while driving.
Mm-hmm.
If you just get pulled over, you're probably just gonna spend an evening in jail and pay some fines.
Yeah, so I thought that was not just the drinking culture, because it very much is so prevalent there. There's just such a different cultural standard around the actual, driving if you're drinking. And I think for having such a drinking culture, it's a very respectable thing to be like, but do not drive. And that's kind of a shocking,
Honestly, better.
Yeah, better, but just kind of like oh wow, okay, this is very different from what I'm used to. And I feel like most people I know would be okay with having a drink or two and then driving and feeling comfortable with that, as long as they're not above the alcohol limit. We came up with so many more differences like this. So if you want to see another video about more differences, let us know. Or if you have some differences that you noticed, let us know. If you have not subscribed to our channel, would you do us a favor? Would you hit that subscribe button and click the thumbs up on this video? Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for watching. Thank you to our patrons for supporting our channel. And if you haven't seen the video where we talked about some of the reverse culture shocks and things that were stark differences when we first got back to the US from our extended travels in the UK and Europe, then that video will be right here. So click that link. We'll see you over there.